On April 2, 2025, the world watched as President Trump stood in the Rose Garden. He made a dramatic announcement. Trump declared a new era of tariffs on imported goods. These tariffs would affect over 185 countries and territories. The announcement sent shockwaves through the global economy. It marked a significant escalation in Trump's trade war tactics. The president's decision reflected his long-held belief. He believes that other countries have been taking advantage of the United States in trade deals. Trump argues that these tariffs are necessary. He claims they will protect American jobs and industries. However, critics fear the opposite. They warn of a potential trade war and economic recession. Global leaders and businesses were caught off guard. They scrambled to assess the potential impact on their economies. The world waits to see what the ultimate consequences of Trump's tariff tsunami will be. One thing is certain, the global trade landscape is changing. The cornerstone of Trump's new tariff regime is a sweeping 10% tariff on all imports. This baseline tariff, effective April 5, 2025, applies broadly across the globe. It targets goods ranging from raw materials to finished products. This move is designed to give American-made goods a competitive edge. At least that is the intention. However, this broad-brush approach has drawn criticism from economists and businesses alike. They argue that such a blanket tariff will likely raise prices for consumers. It will also disrupt global supply chains. These disruptions could harm American businesses that rely on imported goods. The impact of this 10% tariff will be felt far and wide. It will affect businesses of all sizes. Consumers will also feel the pinch. The administration argues that these measures are necessary. They need to protect American jobs. They also want to reduce the trade deficit. However, critics argue that tariffs are a blunt instrument. They will ultimately harm the U.S. economy more than they help it. The Trump administration is serious. They are willing to upend decades of global trade norms to achieve their objectives. Beyond the sweeping 10% tariff, the Trump administration has also targeted specific countries with even higher tariffs. These countries, approximately 60 in total, have been labeled worst offenders. They are accused of unfair trade practices that harm American businesses and workers. These additional tariffs, ranging from 20% to 54%, are set to take effect on April 9, 2025. The countries facing the brunt of these targeted tariffs are major players in the global economy. They include China, the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and Vietnam. These countries are major exporters to the United States. They are likely to feel the pain of these tariffs acutely. The Trump administration argues that these targeted tariffs are necessary to level the playing field. They want to force these countries to the negotiating table. They hope to secure more favorable trade deals for the United States. However, these countries have shown no signs of backing down. They are preparing retaliatory tariffs of their own. This tit-for-tat escalation has raised fears of a full-blown trade war. This strategy carries significant risks. Amidst the sweeping tariffs imposed by the Trump administration, two countries have been spared the brunt of the new trade measures: Canada and Mexico. These North American neighbors, partners in the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, are exempt from the 10% baseline tariff. However, they are still subject to existing tariffs of 25%. This exemption reflects the close economic ties between the United States and its North American neighbors. Canada and Mexico are among the United States' largest trading partners. The USMCA, which replaced the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, was a signature achievement of the Trump administration. Despite the exemption from the new tariffs, Canada and Mexico have expressed concerns about the Trump administration's protectionist trade policies. They fear that these policies could eventually harm their own economies. They have also criticized the tariffs imposed on other countries. They argue that these tariffs will ultimately hurt the global trading system. The exemption of Canada and Mexico from the 10% baseline tariff highlights the complex web of trade relationships. Section 5. The global backlash begins. The reaction to President Trump's tariff announcement was swift and fierce. Across the globe, leaders and officials condemned the move, warning of dire consequences for the international economy. The prospect of a global trade war, once a distant threat, suddenly loomed large. The European Union, long a target of Trump's trade ire, threatened retaliatory tariffs on a range of American goods. French President Macron went further, calling for a united European response to halt U.S. investments in the bloc. In Asia, the reaction was equally stark. Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba described the situation as a national crisis. He vowed to protect Japanese industries and workers from the impact of the tariffs. The World Trade Organization expressed deep concern over the escalating trade tensions. The organization warned that the tariffs could undermine the rules-based trading system that has underpinned global prosperity for decades. The global backlash to Trump's tariffs underscored the interconnectedness of the global economy. The world watched anxiously as the trade war escalated, hoping for a diplomatic resolution to the crisis. Section 6. Economic shockwaves. The aftershocks of President Trump's tariff announcement reverberated through global financial markets. Stock markets around the world plunged as investors grappled with the uncertainty unleashed by the escalating trade war. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, a key barometer of American economic health, plummeted by 4%. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq followed suit, falling by 5% and 6% respectively. Economists warned of a heightened risk of a global recession. J.P. Morgan predicted a 60% chance of a recession by the end of 2025. The tariffs, they argued, would disrupt global supply chains, increase costs for businesses, and dampen consumer spending. The impact of the tariffs was already being felt by businesses across the globe. Stellantis, a multinational automotive manufacturer, announced temporary layoffs and plant closures in response to the tariffs on imported car parts. The economic fallout from the tariffs underscored the high stakes of the trade dispute. Section 7. Political fault lines. The escalating trade war exposed deep political fault lines both within the United States and on the international stage. In Washington, D.C., President Trump remained defiant, defending his tariffs as necessary to protect American jobs and industries. He argued that the tariffs would bring trading partners to the negotiating table and force them to make concessions. However, Trump's aggressive trade policies faced mounting criticism from both Democrats and Republicans. Critics argued that the tariffs would harm American consumers, raise prices, and damage the economy. They also questioned the effectiveness of tariffs as a negotiating tactic. On the international stage, the tariffs further strained relations between the United States and its allies. European leaders accused the United States of abandoning its commitment to free trade and multilateralism. The tariffs threatened to undermine decades of cooperation and trust between the United States and its European partners. The trade war also exacerbated tensions between the United States and China. Section 8. The Art of the Tariff Deal. President Trump, a self-proclaimed master of the art of the deal, viewed the tariffs as a key negotiating tactic in his quest to reshape global trade in America's favor. He believed that the threat of tariffs or their actual imposition would force other countries to make concessions and agree to trade deals that benefited the United States. Trump's approach to trade negotiations was unconventional and often confrontational. He eschewed traditional diplomacy and multilateral agreements in favor of bilateral deals that he believed would give the United States more leverage. He was quick to impose tariffs and threaten further action if his demands were not met. However, Trump's tactics drew criticism from trade experts and diplomats who argued that they were counterproductive and risked damaging the global trading system. They argued that tariffs were a blunt instrument that often harmed the economies of both the countries imposing them and those subject to them. Despite the criticism, Trump remained convinced that his hard-nosed approach to trade was necessary to protect American interests. Whether his tariffs would ultimately achieve their desired results remained to be seen. Section 9. A World on Edge. As the dust settled on President Trump's tariff announcement, the world found itself on edge, bracing for the unknown. The global economy, already facing headwinds from slowing growth and geopolitical uncertainty, now had to contend with the specter of a trade war. The rules-based trading system that had underpinned global prosperity for decades seemed to be unraveling. The consequences of the tariffs were likely to be far-reaching and unpredictable. Businesses faced disruptions to their supply chains, higher costs, and reduced demand. Consumers could expect to see prices rise for a wide range of goods, from cars and electronics to food and clothing. The tariffs also threatened to fuel inflation, reduce economic growth, and cost jobs. The political fallout from the tariffs was equally uncertain. the trade war strained relations between the United States and its allies, jeopardizing decades of cooperation and trust. The world held its breath, watching and waiting to see how the trade war would play out.